Hi everyone, welcome to today's ASPE interview. Today we're here with Steve from Queensland. He's a clinical psychologist who was diagnosed with ADHD 36 years ago and only received his autism diagnosis recently, I think about a year ago, right Steve?
A bit over a year.
Some of his children are also on the autism spectrum and have ADHD, so this is going to be an interesting story. So thanks for joining us, Steve.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me to come chat.
So that must have been a big thing for you to realise on the autism spectrum as well. Can you tell us a bit about how that came about?
Well, I think that it probably makes more sense just to talk about the ADHD first, because I was diagnosed with that and I kind of knew I had that for a lot longer. And yeah, I was diagnosed at the age of 12. I was failing school and having trouble with friends and doing all that and all that kind of things. And I went to a guy called Gordon Serpentine, is the guy who diagnosed me. And this is in the 1980s, so this is a really long time ago. He was a bit of a pioneer in this field. And yeah, so I went and saw him, and I got the diagnosis. I kind of learned a little bit about ADHD because my mum had some books, and it wasn't a pretty kind of story. It was kind of like, ADHD equals failure. You're going to fail school, you're going to fail your relationship, you're going to be divorced, you're going to do dumb things and get in jail. And it was pretty, a pretty kind of miserable kind of. And when I went and saw Dr. Serpentine, and I said, I think that kind of ASPE catastrophizing had kind of kicked in as well. And he actually said, look, it's not that bad, because this is actually, he said, I've got ADD. And that kind of blew my mind, because here's this pediatrician who's got a nice office looking over Hyde Park, and he's got lots of minions, and I thought, well, maybe it's not that bad. And he kind of put this thing, ADHD is a problem, but it can also be a gift, this idea. So I kind of took that away, and it actually worked out. It didn't end up being a gift for me, not initially, because I failed a lot of school. And even when I got into university, it was even worse because it didn't have the structure. And I did a science degree that supposed to take 3 years, but took 4. And I failed the major, so I just couldn't focus. And that's the ADD, because my ADD is the inattentive type. I can't pay attention. I kind of forget, I lose stuff, and that's kind of my kind of ADD. But just not being able to focus, and so I couldn't study. I'd sit there and go, I'm going to study for 8 hours today, and I'd sit there for 8 hours, but my mind just would wander. I couldn't do it. It was just demoralising. So the ADD didn't end up being a gift for me. It ended up being a failure. And I think that's kind of what my experience with the ADHD was. But I think the autism diagnosis, I didn't get this until, just over a year ago. But because I'm a psychologist, I kind of knew that I had a lot of the qualities and the traits. And when I was given the diagnosis, it wasn't a mind-boggling quantum leap in my thinking. It was just okay, that makes sense.
So given that you already knew a lot about the traits and have worked with other people on the spectrum before, what was it like to apply those things to you? Did you see yourself in those textbooks, or how did you find actually applying it to yourself?
The autism was already there, but I just didn't have a name for it. I think how the ADHD and the ASD works, how they worked for me, was the ASD saved me, because this was I couldn't focus, and I was not doing any good I was basically mid-20s, late 20s. I was basically I failed in just about everything. But then I think something changed. I got some medication for the ADHD, which helped it. And I also got into this thing called psychology, which I loved it. you know, intuitively, I can't really work out what people are doing or thinking. But with psychology, you don't need to, because here's this thing that tells you all these theories, it explains it all to you. So that was a game changer for me. And when I did then I did a psych degree. And then I guess that autistic ability just to hyper focus that came into its own, and I got really involved in this. You know, this was my special interest, and I did really, really well, and I got through my course, and I became like a psychologist. And I think those autistic traits, which probably were not really useful to me when I was younger, I just didn't know how to control them. Like that intense ability to focus. It's kind of like giving the ADHD didn't give control. So it's kind of like giving a fire hose to a 3-year-old. That kind of makes sense. But as I think I'm successful as a psychologist, because I can use that hyper focus to just focus in on the person that's in front of me, just completely blot out everything else. That sensitivities, because I've got those sensitivities, you know, the sound and textures and lights, but also I have sensitivities to other people's emotions, like a very intense one. I was always very affected by other people's emotions, particularly their negative emotions. But as a psychologist, that kind of works, because once I was able to kind of control that, being that sensitive and being able to kind of hyper focus, it kind of worked. And I also think, because I tend to work with kids, and I think that because I think kids are easy to read. Like a teenager, if they don't like you, you don't need to be, you can work it out straight away. The adults are too polite. I think they're a little bit hard for me. But like children and adolescents, and I think having the ADHD is useful too, because there's this kind of yin-yang kind of, my autism is a bit kind of uptight. It's, like the odd couple. It's kind of like the neat freak. It's just like, has to have everything the right way and doesn't like have things changed or ambiguity. Where the ADHD side's kind of like the slob in that scenario. It's kind of loose, and I think so the ADHD is useful because it helps me to tolerate kind of ambiguity and chaos, which I think is useful for a psychologist. And I think the autism controlled the chaos. So I think this kind of odd couple that lives inside of me, I think that kind of worked for me. I don't know if it worked.
So hyperfocus can be a thing with ADHD as well, but it sounds like you're describing something a little bit more controlled, rather than just being hyper stimulated by something and losing hours and hours and hours doing the same thing. So what's the difference for you? Because at the time that you were hyper focusing on psychology, you didn't know about the autism. So how did you reconcile that?
I think I kind of put it down to the autism. No, not to the autism, to the ADHD. But I kind of knew, because I've been working with ADHD kids for a very long time, and I knew that my hyperfocus was different to theirs. It was more like these Asperger kids that I was getting in. It's got a different quality to it. I think that, it's probably a bit, from a personal experience, it's a bit hard to ask me, because I know what my hyperfocus is, but I kind of don't know whether that's really an ADHD hyperfocus or an ASD hyperfocus, but I think it's probably more the ASD hyperfocus. It's a really controlled, it just stays in place and it just blocks out the world, which I don't get distracted doing it. So I think it's probably more on that. But I don't really kind of know from my own personal experience, because I'm not my own clinician.
It's really hard to lock these things down and be very precise about them. But I've definitely heard others in our community who have both autism and ADHD describe a similar thing. So, so some of your children are on the spectrum as well and have ADHD as well?
Yeah, so most of them, I've got 4 kids and all of them are neurodiverse.
Yeah.
One's definite ADHD, and 3 have ADHD diagnosis. One has an autism diagnosis, and the younger one, I'm pretty sure, is on the spectrum.
And how does that help you, or how does that affect you in understanding yourself? I mean, I assume you see part of yourself in your kids. That's pretty common.
I think I do. I think it kind of makes me, I think it makes me kind of, yeah, I guess I am recognizing myself in them. And again, I mean, yeah, my daughter's just gorgeous. She's just, yeah, but then I'm completely biased because I'm a dad.
Yeah.
I just kind of, I was just kind of thinking, kind of the way that I've kind of described like the autism and the ADHD, I've kind of described it in a way that's a little bit like kind of, I don't like, kind of like it is kind of the secret to my success, but I don't think it's kind of a superpower. I don't like shoot laser beams out of my eyes or anything. I think that it's a very ordinary kind of, I don't have any savant skills or anything like that. I think my success is kind of like through, you know, like Thomas Edison's success with the light bulb. You know, he succeeded, but there were 10,000 failures before he did that. And I think that, and also I think I kind of just want to know that, like, for me, like the ADHD and the autism, for me, I consider them a disability. Like, they're kind of a secret to my success, but they're also my disability, because I spend an enormous amount of effort, you know, in my work, just trying to work people out and dealing to organise myself and keeping myself in an even keel and managing all this stuff. And that's quite exhausting. And I kind of come home and I'm just like, it's kind of non-verbal. I'm just kind of go into my room and turn the light off and get quiet. So, and without, you know, I can't work 9 to 5. I have, you know, I've got to work in a flexible kind of environment. Otherwise, I just can't work. So I think that there's, I just wanted to kind of, you know, for me, I think that, yeah, it's the secret to my success, but it's also...
And did you, and how aware were you of all of these needs of yours, like knowing that 9 to 5 is difficult and feeling burnt out at the end of the day? So that kind of autistic burnout is pretty common. I'm not sure how people with ADHD describe that, or if it's similar. But after getting your diagnosis, did that help you to put a name to those things, or help you to actually manage those better? Or
yeah, it did, because I think the context of my burnout, my diagnosis, was I burnt out. I kind of tried to, you know, be successful in the way that the world says is successful, and I just kind of I just kind of burnt myself out, and then all these autistic kind of traits came out, and that's how I got the diagnosis. And they were, because I was so exhausted.
Yeah,
I actually didn't have the energy to mask anymore, and now out came these autistic traits.
Yeah, that's really common, that all of a sudden someone comes out with all of these autistic traits because they no longer have the energy to mask.
Yeah, exactly.
So you felt like you were masking for a long time?
Yeah, I was a king masker. I was, yeah, I think kind of like, I think masking in small doses is, like, I think kind of masking is like kind of any, it's like kind of, I don't know, like, you know, you take a medicine in a small dose and it's actually helpful to you. You take it in a high dose and it's toxic to you, you know, and I think it become toxic to me. And yeah, I think the diagnosis and the burnout together made me kind of think, look, I really need to completely change. I need to redefine my definition of success. I really need to just to slow down and just to be, just to let myself be autistic. And I think that was, yeah, that has really been a bit of a revolution in my life. I'm a lot happier. My mental health is a lot better. And yeah, I think getting the diagnosis was really, for the autism diagnosis, it kind of made, and also because I knew what I needed to do, because I already had been treating people this way for years. So I knew what I needed to do. And once I took that autism component and I integrated that into, okay, this is the plan to firstly for the things to make my life better, then yeah, that it kind of revolutionized. I don't think the understanding of the autism did, but the understanding of how to live my life differently.
Mm.
Like to live as an autistic person, not to live as an autistic person pretending to be a neurotypical person, because that was just
Yeah. And I find that just giving a name to the masking helps a lot as well.
Yeah.
So before you are diagnosed with autism, masking is not called masking. Masking is called coping. And you've got all of these strategies.
Right, yes.
You've got all of these strategies to cope, and all of the challenges that you're having, you've got plenty of ways to mitigate that. And then all of a sudden you've got this label of autism, and you can say, oh, I was actually masking stuff there and it was taking me a huge amount of energy. And that's why I ended up in hospital with burnout. So,
and and I think one of the things you said, there's a conversation we had previously, Paul, and it was kind of like, I kind of had said to you, I kind of knew the autism was there, and you kind of said, kind of sounds like it was so close to you, you couldn't see it. And I said, yes, that's exactly how it was. It was so close to me and so obvious to me that I couldn't see it because it was just right in front of my face. So it's kind of, there's an irony, clinical psychologist who kind of diagnoses these things.
Yeah.
You miss it in yourself. Mm.
Well, there's such a variety of presentations as well.
Yes.
I mean, even Tony Attwood's son, who, he was like the guru of Asperger's, and then his son got diagnosed, in his 20s or something like that. So we might finish up soon, but the last question I'll ask you is there something that you wish the world would know about autism that would be helpful?
I think I would like the world to know that I think, people on the spectrum who are considered high functioning, they're more disabled than you probably realise. And the people who were considered low functioning, I don't like those terms, but people who are considered low functioning, they're actually probably more capable than you realise.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think can I say two things on it?
Sure. It's your interview, you get to... Yeah.
Okay, well, I'm going to make an executive decision and I'm going to have two things to say. I think the other thing is just about, I think the world's understanding of empathy and people on autism, it's kind of like, okay, well, people, they're kind of I think the world tends to think that, okay, well, people with autism have this problem inside of them that means they don't have empathy, it's inside of them. But that's not true. And because I think that's kind of a bit weird because for me, as an autistic person, I'm saying, well, most neurotypical people have really crappy empathy for me. They've got a very poor theory of my mind.
Yeah.
So I think that this empathy it goes both ways. I really wish people would know that, to say, look, it's not that the problem isn't in the autistic person, or not completely. It's between it's called a disorder because only 1% of the population have that, but it's called a disorder because most people. It kind of makes sense. Yeah, so sort of
makes perfect sense. And one way that I often describe this is that how can you possibly talk about communication deficits? Right, communication is between two people. It's a pretty commonly understood thing that communication is a two-way street there. And we've got a diagnostic criteria that lists deficits in social communication. So, yeah.
And I think that, and I think the deficits I don't think that's entirely wrong. I just think it's completely, it's woefully incomplete.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we might leave it there, I think. But thanks for your time, Steve. This has been really interesting. And the idea of getting diagnosed 36 years ago and finally getting a more complete answer, that's a really big deal. So I'm not sure if congratulations is the right thing to say, but
say congratulations. It wasn't congratulations at the time, but I think after a year I've had fun.
Yeah. So I guess it goes to show that getting the right answer can take time sometimes. So
Yeah,
my
that's true.
advice to people is, if the diagnosis doesn't seem right, if something doesn't quite fit, it's worthwhile to keep looking, because eventually you need the right support, and if you don't have the right explanation, then it's hard to get the right
Yeah.
support. So,
And that's, yeah, I think that's really, I agree with that 100%.
Mm.
If you've got the wrong if you have the wrong explanation to something, then your solution is probably going to be wrong too. But,
Yep. Okay. Well, I'm terrible at saying goodbye, but I'll try again.
okay. Thanks, Paul. Thanks for the chat. It was fun.
Yep. Thanks. See you later.
Yeah.